My name is Chloe Vance, and I am 32. The morning I passed out on the tile floor of the ER, the front desk called my folks. They never showed up. I spent over a decade playing hero, catching everyone else when they tripped up. And the single time my knees buckled, the two people listed as my emergency contacts decided I could totally handle it solo. My brother could have made the short 30-minute drive over. Instead, he was kicking back at the lake house. But here's what none of those clowns knew. While I was lying there, hooked up to an IV bag, my brother was already planning a weekend bash at a property that had my name listed right on the deed. And what I did about that photo he posted online, the one bragging, "Finally, a weekend away from all the drama," flipped the script on everything this family thought they could get away with. Welcome back to Red Wine Revenge, where the quiet ones finally get the last word and the truth outlasts the noise. If you have ever been the dependable one, the person who always shows up for everybody and gets remembered by nobody, this story is totally for you. Stay with me because the ending is one you are going to want to sit with. Drop a comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. It was a Monday and I was working my second double shift in a row. I had been running on gas station energy drinks and pure stubbornness for weeks. My stomach had been acting up since early spring. Just a dull, nagging ache I kept brushing off as work stress. I am an ICU nurse. I know the textbook drill for pain that refuses to quit. I just never bothered to follow it for myself. That morning, I was finishing up charting at the nurse's station when the whole room suddenly tilted sideways. The letters on the monitor blurred together. My mouth felt like cotton and a cold sweat broke out across my neck all at once. I remember thinking super calmly that I should probably sit down. Then the floor just rushed up to meet me. Dana caught my head right before it hit the hard linoleum. She is 45, has been running triage longer than I have had my license, and she didn't flip out for a second. She just started rattling off vital stats. My blood pressure had completely bottomed out. When they rolled me over, there was blood where it definitely shouldn't have been. Dark and sluggish, the kind of red that tells a seasoned nurse internal bleeding has been happening for a while. A slow drip, not a sudden burst. My body had been quietly quitting on me for weeks, and I had been way too busy holding everyone else's world together to even notice. They got an IV line in me fast. Somewhere above my head, a heart monitor started its sharp, annoying beep. And for once, I was the patient it was actually freaking out about. I had spent my entire life catching other people, and I had never once stopped to figure out who would catch me. As they wheeled me toward imaging, I heard Dana say she would pull my emergency contacts and make the calls. I closed my eyes and just let them work, thinking, at least somebody is going to show up. They admitted me by noon. A bleeding stomach ulcer, the doctor called it. One I had been walking around on until my red blood cell count dropped so low, my legs just gave out. My hemoglobin was less than half of what it should have been. They got my blood type sorted and started the first transfusion, while a doc with kind eyes told me I was stuck for at least 2 nights of monitoring and an endoscopy. I nodded like a compliant patient because I knew the routine. What I couldn't wrap my head around was the stupid, childish wave of hope still bubbling up in my chest. Weakness. It is just the oldest reflex there is. I heard Dana's voice drop into that soft, professional tone, the one we use when we are about to deliver some heavy news. Then it got quieter. Then it stopped completely. For about an hour after that, I let myself hold onto this stupid belief that the door would swing open and my mom would walk right through it, coat still on, asking a million questions. I stared at that door until the second bag of blood was almost empty. The door stayed shut. Dana came back instead, and I could tell right away from her expression that the phone call had completely flopped. Dana sat on the edge of my hospital bed, which is something nurses only do when the news gets personal. She is not one to sugarcoat things, and honestly, I respected her even more for it. She told me she had reached my mother. She explained I was stable, but admitted I had needed a transfusion and would be stuck here for a couple of days. She gently asked if the family wanted to head up. And my mother, Marlene Vance, 63, who raised me on casseroles and constant comparisons, had only asked 2 questions. Was I conscious? Was I going to live? When Dana said yes to both, my mother told her they were right in the middle of something, that I was a nurse, and that I knew hospitals better than anyone anyway. Chloe is always fine, she had said. Chloe is always fine. Then she wished Dana a good afternoon and hung up before Dana could even get another word out. Dana repeated it to me straight because she knew I deserved the raw truth over cheap comfort. I thanked her. I didn't cry in front of her because crying felt way too much like proving my mom right. A little while later, my phone lit up with a single text from my dad, Roy. "Hope you feel better, kiddo." That was it. No phone call, no visit, no asking which hospital room I was in. Just a lazy get-well text he could type without ever lifting himself out of his recliner. I flipped the phone face down on the blanket, lay completely still, and let those words sink deep down like dirt settling at the bottom of a pond. Chloe is always fine. I had spent my entire life acting unbreakable so nobody else would have to worry. And somewhere along the way, my being fine had become their official permission slip to leave me flat on the floor. I wondered, for the very first time, what on earth they could possibly be in the middle of. The first night in a hospital bed is always the longest. The machines operate on their own weird hours, and the harsh hallway light always finds that gap under the door, no matter how you position yourself. I lay there with an IV needle taped to my arm and a bag of donor blood slowly dripping into my veins, doing what I do best, staying completely calm and taking inventory. Exactly the way I chart a critical patient at 3 a.m. I thought back to being 6 years old, scraping my knee raw in the driveway, and having to clean and bandage it myself at the bathroom sink because my mom was busy dealing with Brad, who was throwing a tantrum over a lost toy in the next room. I thought about driving myself to my own dental surgery at 16. I thought about every casserole I had baked, every emergency bill I had secretly covered, and every single holiday I had hosted so nobody else in the family had to lift a finger. I was not throwing a pity party. I was simply reading the chart, and the chart was telling a very clear story. Chloe handles it. Chloe is fine. Chloe does not need anything. I had built that entire reputation with my own 2 hands, one quiet sacrifice at a time, and now it was being used as the exact excuse for why nobody had to love me out loud. I asked the vital sign monitor beside me for a second opinion. It just kept rhythmically beeping. Somewhere in that long, dark night, I stopped waiting for the door to open. It is a strange kind of peace, letting go of a hope you have carried since you were a kid. Lighter and lonelier all at once. If I was always fine, I thought, then why did every single one of them need me to be? I fell asleep before I found the answer. In the morning, I found the photo instead. I woke up to bright sunlight and a phone buzzing with notifications, and I made the mistake of opening the one from my brother first. Brad had posted it while I was out. It was a gorgeous picture. I will give him that. Golden hour on the water, a kayak paddle dripping sunlight, and 2 sweating mimosas sitting right on the dock railing. My family's dock. The caption underneath read, "Finally, a day without the drama," followed by a little leaf emoji like a tiny sprig of peace. 41 likes. My aunt had commented, "Gorgeous!" My cousin had left a string of heart eyes emojis. And right there at the top, my mother had left a single red heart, the kind she has never once in her life left on anything I have posted. I lay there and did the kind of math a kid could figure out. The day I collapsed on the ER floor, the day the hospital called and they claimed they were right in the middle of something. This was the something. They had packed the coolers and driven out to the lake house while I was getting a blood transfusion. And they had toasted to the fact that I wasn't there. A day without the drama. I was the drama, not the ulcer bleeding me white, not my mother hanging up on a nurse, Not my brother posting cocktails from a dock. Me lying still and quiet 2 counties over was somehow the storm they had finally escaped. I zoomed in on that dock without meaning to, and I instantly recognized the railing. I had sanded and stained it myself 2 summers ago on my hands and knees in the blazing heat because the old splintered wood was chewing up the kids' feet. I stared at that photo until the nurse came in to check my line, and something inside me went very cold and very clear. Not angry, just clear. The way water goes completely still right before the temperature drops. They discharged me Wednesday afternoon with a bulky bag of meds and a strict list of foods to avoid. Nobody from my family had bothered to call and ask what time I was getting sprung. Dana actually had her day off, but she came in anyway in her regular clothes and told me she was driving me home. That is the ultimate truth about the people who actually show up. It is almost never the ones you are related to. We took the long way back, and somewhere along the winding county road, I asked her to turn down the lane that runs past the lake. I do not fully know why. Maybe I just needed to see the thing everyone kept celebrating without me. Dana slowed the car down, and I looked at the house through the trees. It sat there the exact same way it always had, low and brown against the water. The front porch I had painted. The roof I had paid to have reshingled after the heavy winter ice storm. Brad's little white SUV was parked out in the gravel. Even though the party in the photo was 2 days gone, somebody had left folding chairs scattered across the lawn. From the road, anyone driving past would have seen a classic family cabin, the kind passed down through generations, warm with love. I saw 6 years of heavy receipts. I saw a property tax bill I paid every October, a well pump I replaced in January, and an insurance premium that came directly out of my checking account, not theirs. I did not ask Dana to stop. I just looked at it the way you look at a patient you already know is not going to make it, with a strange, tender calm. Then I told her I had seen enough, and we drove on. She glanced at me at the stop sign and asked if I was all right. I told her I was finally starting to be. Home was a modest apartment just 10 minutes from the hospital, quiet and entirely mine, featuring a small kitchen table I had bought with my very first real paycheck. I set my discharge papers down on it, opened my laptop, and discovered the family had already planned my entire week for me. There was a digital event invitation waiting. Brad had created it using a graphic of a diamond ring surrounded by a border of little champagne glasses. Engagement Sunday at the lake. It announced that he and his girlfriend were getting married, hosting the official reveal right at the house, and I had been added to the guest list the exact way you add a contracted caterer. Not as a sister. No phone call. No can you believe it? Just a cold notification. And right below it in the family group chat, my mother had already set the law. Family only. Everyone. Let's keep it drama-free and lovely for Brad's big day. She wrote it to a thread of 9 people, and not one of those 9 had thought to text me privately and ask how my blood transfusion went. I scrolled up just to double-check. Nothing. Not a single private message asking if I had made it home safely, if I was able to eat anything, or if I needed help at all. Just the family group chat mapping out a celebration at a house I owned, warning one another in advance to make sure I did not ruin it. My mother's next message popped up on the screen while I stared at the phone. We are finally having a nice weekend together as a family. Don't make it about you, Chloe. She had not even bothered to ask if I was coming. She had just assumed I would be there. The way you automatically assume the lights will flick on when you hit the switch? That was the exact second it stopped feeling like heartbreak and started turning into pure resolve. I snapped my laptop shut. Sunday was 5 days away. I already knew precisely what was going to go down at that house. They just had no clue yet. To make any sense of what I did next, you have to rewind 6 years back to a brutal winter when everything nearly imploded. My dad had his first massive heart attack that January. He survived it, but the medical bills certainly did not vanish when the danger passed. 3 major surgeries, an extended hospital stay, and a cardiac rehabilitation program that insurance fought us on at every single turn. The debt rolled in like water creeping under a front door. And right in the dead center of that chaos, while my mom was still sleeping upright in a stiff hospital chair, a certified letter arrived from the county. The lake house was heading straight to a tax sale. It turned out my parents had been quietly falling behind on property taxes for years, letting the warning notices pile up in a junk drawer the exact same way they let every other difficult problem pile up. And now, the county was officially done waiting. The house that had hosted every Thanksgiving, every 4th of July, and every childhood memory was about to be auctioned off on the cold courthouse steps to clear a massive debt with penalties stacked sky high. My mother called me in a blind panic I could physically feel through the phone speaker. She did not ask how I was doing, whether I could afford to help, or what it would cost my own future. She just dropped the line she always used whenever the ground started shaking underneath us. "You are the sensible one, Chloe. You always fix things. Do something." I was 26 years old back then. I had a nurse's modest savings account, a pair of steady hands, and that deep-rooted reflex drilled into me ever since I was scraping knees on the driveway. So I told her I would look into it. I hung up, sat down at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a fresh pot of coffee, and crunched the numbers until the sun came up, because that is simply what I do. That is who they trained me to be. By morning, I knew the exact amount it would take to rescue the property. The total was a little over $41,000. That covered back taxes, severe penalties, redemption fees, and enough of my dad's most aggressive medical debt to finally stop the collection agencies from calling and sending his blood pressure through the roof. I had most of it sitting in a savings account I had been guarding for a down payment on a home of my own someday. I took out a high-interest personal loan for the rest. I paid the county off with a cashier's check whose heavy paper weight I still vividly remember. But here is where the story stopped being a simple family rescue. The attorney my parents used, an old family acquaintance, friend named Hollis, pulled me aside right after the paperwork was signed. He told me straight up that my parents still had aggressive creditors circling them like sharks, and if the deed stayed in their name, the exact same disaster would happen all over again the moment another medical bill came due. The only way to actually protect the property, he explained, was to put it completely out of reach of their debtors, to put it in the name of the person who had actually bailed them out. My parents signed a quit-claim deed that very afternoon, transferring the lake house to me as the sole owner in front of a notary of their own free will. They were completely relieved. I vividly remember my mom squeezing my hand and telling me it was a massive weight lifted off her shoulders. And then she dropped the line that let all of us comfortably pretend nothing had really changed. It will always be the family place anyway. Names on a piece of paper do not matter between family. I believed her. That was my ultimate mistake if I made one. Not the money, not the deed, but the believing. I signed my name to a legal document that made me the sole owner of my family's emotional core. Then I folded it up, filed it away, and let everyone keep acting like it belonged to the collective whole. Why? Because it was easier. And because I loved them, which back then still felt entirely synonymous with trusting them. For 6 solid years after that, I paid every single dime for a house I never once got to actually relax in. Every October, the property tax bill arrived at my mailbox, and every October, I paid it in full from my own account. When the roof lost shingles during a heavy winter ice storm, I hired the contractor and wrote the hefty check. When the well pump died in the dead of January, threatening to freeze the entire plumbing system, I drove out through freezing sleet, met the plumber in the dark, and paid him, too. The homeowner's insurance auto-renewed on my credit card. The dock staining, the gutter clearing, the massive oak tree, the storm dropped right across the driveway. Mine, mine, mine. And for all 6 of those years, the rest of the family used that house like it was oxygen. Summer weekends, holiday dinners, my brother's friends heading up for a guy's trip, my parents' wedding anniversaries. Not once did anyone ever ask who paid the property taxes. I genuinely think most of them never even wondered. The bill simply did not exist in their universe, the exact way electricity just works when you flip a switch, and you never stop to picture the heavy wiring behind the wall. I never brought it up. I told myself it was pure generosity, and honestly, some of it was. But a lot of it was just easier than starting a fight. It was easier to silently pay the invoice than to explain, easier to write a check than to say out loud that I was carrying a burden no one else was offering to help me hold. So, I kept every single receipt in a dedicated folder on my laptop, not because I was plotting some grand revenge, but simply because I am the kind of person who keeps receipts. I kept them for the exact same reason I meticulously chart my hospital patients, because when the story inevitably gets rewritten later to make someone else look like the victim, the paper trail is the only thing left that remembers the unvarnished truth. I had no idea how desperately I was going to need that folder. Not yet. I know some of you are already talking back to your screens right now, yelling at me to speak up, to slam the bills down on the table, and just watch the color drain from their faces. I hear you loud and clear. But when you are the designated pillar who always holds everyone else up, keeping your mouth shut starts to feel a whole lot safer than starting a war. You will be blamed for starting. If this is landing a little too close to home, tell me in the comments. Are you the dependable one, too? Be sure to subscribe and stay with me because Sunday is coming. 2 days out of the hospital, still looking pale and moving slow, I got sucked straight into the party logistics thread. Not because anyone wanted my actual company, but because they wanted my labor. Brad texted the group about tables, string lights, and a florist. Then he texted me directly for the first time all week. Not to ask how I was recovering, but to assign me a shift. Can you get to the house early Saturday to set up? You are always good at that stuff. I read it twice. It was the absolute only private message my brother had sent me since before I hit the ER floor, and it was a direct work order. My mother chimed into the group chat a minute later, layering on the final instructions. And please, no hospital talk this weekend. It is Brad's big day. Let's not make it heavy. No hospital talk. As if my 2 days bleeding internally in a bed were just an inconvenient mood I might drag along, like bringing the wrong side dish to a potluck. As if the story of me nearly running out of red blood cells was something that might stain their precious tablecloth. Then, because the universe loves a dark joke, my mother added the exact line that had shadowed my entire life. Chloe is always so good at the setup. She'll handle it. Chloe will handle it. They wanted me to arrive early, arrange the folding chairs, string the lights, and lay out the food at a house I owned and paid the taxes on. All so everyone else could show up well-rested and celebrate a day completely free of my drama. And the maddening part is that just 1 week earlier, I would have done it. I would have shown up at 9 a.m., set everything up beautifully, stood quietly in the background, and pretended to be fine. But I had just spent a long, agonizing night in a hospital bed learning exactly what being fine had cost me. I did not reply to the thread, not yet. That night, sleep refused to come, so I got up and pulled a small gray fireproof box down from the top of my closet shelf. The kind you buy when you finally have things worth protecting. I set it on my small kitchen table under the single bright overhead light, opened it up, and laid everything out in front of me, one document at a time, exactly like a surgical nurse laying out instruments before a procedure. First, the quitclaim deed. Heavy legal paper with the notary's raised seal you can still feel with the pad of your thumb. My name typed clean and clear on the line that designates the grantee. Sole owner. Not my mother's name, not the family collective, mine. Underneath it, the cashier's check stub for $41,000, 6 years old and soft at the folds. Then the stack of property tax receipts, one for every single October, each one stamped paid. The roofer's invoice, the plumber's receipt, and the homeowner's insurance policy declarations page with my name and address sitting proudly in the corner. I spread them all across the kitchen table until there was not a single inch of wood left showing, and I sat down in front of them just to look. There is a very particular kind of quiet that washes over you when you hold undeniable proof. Not anger, not petty vindication, just pure, unshakable reality. For 6 years, I had let other people's words do the deciding. My mother's words that names on paper do not matter between family. My brother's words that I was the living embodiment of drama. Their deafening silence while I bled in an ER bed, which was its own distinct kind of vocabulary. And right here, under a kitchen light at midnight, sat the things that do not get emotional and do not take sides. Paper does not feel guilt, and paper does not lie. It just tells the truth, the exact same truth, every single time you ask it. I ran my thumb over the raised notary seal one more time. Every October for 6 years, I had paid out of my own pocket to keep a roof over a family that would not even cross a hospital parking lot to check if I was breathing. I stared at the deed for a long time. Then my mind began to shift toward what that legal ownership was actually capable of doing. The phone call came the next morning, and I want to make it crystal clear that I did not go looking for it. It found me. My phone rang while I was chewing on the plain piece of toast the doctor said I was allowed to have. It was an unknown local number, and I almost let it go straight to voicemail. I am eternally grateful I didn't. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Gwen Ostrander, a real estate agent based over in the county seat. She sounded polite, professional, and distinctly apologetic. The exact way people talk when they are not entirely sure they have dialed the right person. She said she represented a couple who had been hunting for a place on Lake Warren for the better part of a year. Retirees, cash buyers, patient folks who knew precisely the kind of quiet waterfront property they wanted. They had their eye on one particular spot for months, she explained. The brown house with the great dock sitting right out on the point. She mentioned that half the people in town assumed it belonged to a Marlene Vance, and she had almost sent a letter directly to my mother. But she had done her due diligence first and pulled the official county land records to track down the legal holder of the title. And the name right there on the deed, she said, was mine. She asked gently, with zero pressure, whether the current owner might ever consider listing it for sale. I stood in my small kitchen with my piece of toast turning cold, not answering her right away. I simply told her I appreciated the call, that I would think about it, and took down her direct number. Then I hung up, looked back down at the deed, still spread across the table from the night before, gazed at the quiet morning ahead of me, and glanced over at a group text thread completely packed with work orders for a party being thrown at my house. Gwen had called the right person. She was the first human being in a very long time who had bothered to actually check whose name was on the paperwork. I told myself I was not going to do anything impulsive. I am not an impulsive person. So for a solid day, I did nothing but watch, and the family kept happily handing me new reasons. Brad sent out the formal digital invitations that afternoon. Fancy electronic cards with gold lettering. Right there, underneath the announcement of his engagement, written in a curling script, was the official slogan for the entire event: a drama-free celebration. He had taken the exact caption from the photo he posted while I was trapped in a hospital bed, that little dig about a day without drama, and turned it into the central banner of his engagement party. He had even ordered custom cocktail napkins printed with it. My cousin texted a picture of them to the group chat, a towering stack of cream-colored napkins with the slogan stamped in shiny gold foil. "So cute," someone wrote. My mother chimed in to say that the house always looked its absolute best in early autumn. "Our house," she wrote. "Our beautiful lake house." And she added that she had been thinking it was high time the family had a formal conversation about who gets to use it and when, especially now that Brad and his fiancée would be starting a family of their own. Deciding who gets to use my house. deciding it entirely in a group chat where I was only kept around to handle the manual labor. I read every single message and set the phone down very gently, because gentle was the only way I trusted my hands right then. They had printed my brother's calculated insult onto customized napkins. They were going to fold those insults into little triangles and place one at every single plate on my dock, under my roof, in a house I had drained my savings to rescue while they toasted the fact that I was miles away. I picked the phone back up. I stared at Gwen Ostrander's phone number for one long, quiet minute. Not yet, I told myself. One more, try the honest way first. I want to be able to tell you that I gave them a fair chance. So I did. And I will let you decide if it counts. That evening, I texted my mother privately, completely away from the family group chat, using the calmest words I could muster. I told her I was happy for Brad. I suggested that before the big party on Sunday, the two of us should sit down together, just the two of us, to talk honestly about the lake house. Not to fight, I explained, but simply to clear the air. Finally, after 6 years, I even softened the approach. I told her there were a few financial details regarding the property that she might not fully remember, and I wanted us to be completely on the same page before Sunday rolled around. I watched the 3 little typing dots appear and disappear twice. Then her reply came through, and it was so perfectly, predictably her that I almost laughed out loud. Honestly, Chloe, not now. You always pick the worst possible timing. Your brother is trying to have one happy weekend, and you want to have some big, heavy talk. Don't be dramatic. Whatever it is can wait. Don't be dramatic. There it was again. The exact word they had hung around my neck like an anchor ever since I was a little girl. The word printed right on the party napkins. The word my mother reflexively reached for any time I asked to be treated like a whole, living person instead of an on-call service worker. I had offered her an open door. I had knocked on it as politely as I knew how. And she had looked straight through the peephole, recognized my face, and called the simple knock itself a disturbance. That was the exact moment something inside me that had been holding on for 6 solid years quietly let go. I wasn't angry anymore. I had moved past angry days ago. I was clear. Clear the way a lake gets in late autumn when all the summer churn finally settles out of it. I put my phone down. I looked at the deed. I looked at Gwen's phone number written on the notepad beside it. I had given them one final door to walk through, and they had chosen to call it drama. So I stopped knocking. In the morning, I called Gwen Ostrander back. My hands were completely steady. I had actually slept better than I had in a week, which tells you something profound about how right a decision can feel, even when it demands a heavy cost. I told her I was the sole owner of the house on the point, that the public record was entirely correct, and that I was ready to have a serious conversation about selling the property. She was professional, warm, and didn't pry into the messy family dynamics. She just got straight to work. She told me her buyers were the real deal. A retired couple named the Prescotts who had recently sold their life's business and wanted one peaceful place to grow old beside the water. Cash buyers. No complicated financing, waiting to fall through at the 11th hour. Willing to take the house completely, as is, with zero nickel and diming over a home inspection. What they wanted most, she said, was speed and absolute certainty. I told her what I wanted, and it wasn't the highest, most exploitative price in the world. I wanted a fair market value. Nothing gouged, but nothing given away either. I wanted a clean, quiet transaction with people who would genuinely love and respect the place. And I wanted the paperwork executed flawlessly. Every single line dotted, 0 loose ends. Because I had spent 6 years living through the painful lesson of what happens when people leave legal paperwork rotting in a drawer. Gwen said the Prescotts would likely meet a fair price without blinking an eye. Then she asked carefully whether there was anyone else who needed to sign off. Any co-owner, any hidden family stake. I told her the unvarnished truth. "No," I said. "It's just my name. It's only ever been my name." Saying those words out loud in broad daylight to a total stranger who believed me simply because the county land records backed it up did something to me I wasn't entirely expecting. It anchored me the rest of the way. I wasn't executing this in a blind rage. A blind rage would have been throwing a cell phone across a kitchen. This was far quieter, far more deliberate, and infinitely more permanent. "I am not selling this house in anger," I told her. "I am selling it in absolute truth. There is a massive difference." She said she understood. And looking back, I truly believe she did. I handled the next part the way I do everything in life, carefully, methodically, and out loud with myself. I didn't want to look back later and find a single action driven by temporary heat instead of sound thought. I hired my own real estate attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Ruth, who meticulously reviewed the deed and confirmed everything I already knew. The title was crystal clear. No liens, no co-owners, no legal clouds. I held the full and exclusive right to sell, and absolutely nobody's signature but mine was required. Gwen arranged for a professional appraisal, so the final price would be entirely fair and legally defensible. A real market valuation, not some spite-driven figure. The Prescotts came back and agreed to meet it immediately. And then I did the thing that mattered most to me, the thing that allows me to sleep with a clear conscience. I sat down with 6 years of meticulous financial records and calculated down to the exact dollar what my parents had actually contributed to that house since the day I saved it from the tax auction. The answer was practically nothing. A tank of heating oil one harsh winter, a case of light bulbs. Less than $200 all told, stacked against the $41,000 I had paid up front and the 6 consecutive years of property taxes I had carried on my own back. But it wasn't literally zero, so I wasn't going to treat it like zero. I set that minor amount aside, plus the exact value of their original down payment from decades prior, into a separate figure that I intended to hand them. Clean, because I could be furious and fair at the exact same time. And I decided I was going to be both out loud right where it counted. I wasn't going to become the bitter, vindictive person they had always accused me of being. I wasn't going to take a single thing that wasn't legally mine. I was only going to stop pretending that what belonged to me still belonged to them. Ruth drew up all the legal paperwork. Gwen scheduled the formal signing for Friday. On Sunday, the family was going to gather at the lake to celebrate a drama-free day. They had no idea what Friday was about to make of their little weekend. All through that week, while I was quietly closing the book on the house for good, my family was busy decorating it. It would almost be funny if it weren't so deeply telling. My mother called me twice, and both times it was purely to manage me. During the first call, she instructed me to be at the house by 9 a.m. on Saturday to wipe down the deck and set up the tables because the caterer needed a clear workspace. And of course, she threw in her favorite tagline, "Chloe is always fine. She'll get it done." She said it like it was the highest form of praise. During the second call, she told me to wear something that wouldn't clash with the photos because Brad's fiancé had picked a strict color palette, and apparently, I had a bad habit of standing out wrong in pictures. I stood in my kitchen and listened to my mother dress code me for a party at a house she did not even own. And I just said, "All right, Mom," because there was nothing left to argue about. Arguing is what you do when you still harbor a tiny shred of hope that you can change someone's mind. I was long past that illusion. At one point, she sighed heavily into the phone and dropped the classic line families like mine always serve up to the person they rely on most. "This is what family does, Chloe. We show up for each other." I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second so she wouldn't hear me catch my breath. We show up for each other. I thought about a hospital door that never swung open. I thought about a cold mimosa on a dock and a red heart on a gloating photo. Do we? I thought. Do we actually show up? I didn't say it out loud. I just told her I would be there Saturday, which was technically true. And I let her hang up, completely convinced she had managed me the exact same way she always had. She was happily decorating the deck of a property that was already, in every way that a legal document can make real, on its way completely out of her life. On Friday, I sat at a polished conference table with Gwen and Ruth and signed the purchase and sale agreement for the house on the point. I want to be precise here because I am a stickler for the truth, and I refuse to dress it up. Signing that agreement on Friday didn't hand the Prescotts the keys that very afternoon. What it did was make the sale entirely real and legally binding. Earnest money was deposited straight into escrow. The sale price was locked. The terms were set in stone. My signature was on every single page where it belonged. The official closing was scheduled for 30 days out, the normal runway these things take. But the decision was no longer up for debate. It was an ironclad contract. The house was, for all practical purposes that mattered, sold. I signed my name on line after line, the exact same name that had been sitting on the deed for 6 solid years, and my hand didn't shake a single time. When it was finished, Gwen shook my hand and told me the Prescotts were over the moon, mentioning they had already talked about making sure to preserve the maple tree I had personally planted by the porch. I asked her to keep the entire transaction completely quiet until Sunday. I wanted to be the one to tell my family face to face on my own terms, rather than having them catch wind of it as town gossip. She readily agreed. That evening, before the property officially belonged to anyone else, I drove out to the lake alone. The sun was dipping low, painting the water in brilliant shades of orange, and the folding chairs were still scattered across the lawn from a party I hadn't even been invited to attend as a guest. I walked out onto the wooden dock, onto the exact railing I had sanded down on my hands and knees, and stood there in the cooling evening air. I wasn't sad, exactly. You can deeply love a place and still finally accept that it was never loving you back the way you deserved. I signed my name where it already belonged, I thought to myself. Then I let it go, turned around, and drove home feeling lighter than I had in years. I showed up Saturday morning at 9 a.m. sharp, exactly as instructed, and set up the party. I know how that sounds to anyone listening, but I wasn't there to blindly obey anymore. I was there because I wanted to see the house one last time while it was still filled with my family's voices, and because whatever I needed to say on Sunday, I wanted to say it, knowing I had done my part honestly, with a clean conscience and nothing to be ashamed of. So, I wiped down the wooden deck I had kept alive over the years. I set out the tables and strung the fairy lights along the porch rail. I laid out the cream-colored napkins with their gold-stamped letters at every single place setting. A drama-free celebration, folded into neat little triangles. Brad breezed in and out barking orders, never once asking how I was feeling barely a week after needing a massive blood transfusion. My mother arrived at 11 a.m., immediately launched into a slow inspection, adjusted a centerpiece I had already meticulously centered, and reminded me one more time under her breath, no hospital talk. Only one person that whole morning looked at me like an actual human being. My great-aunt Peg, 70 years old and sharp as a tack, stepped out onto the deck holding a cup of coffee she had brought over just for me, even though I hadn't asked for it. She studied my pale face for a long moment, the way older women do when they have buried a husband, raised a generation, and completely outlived their tolerance for nonsense. She leaned in and whispered softly so no one else could catch it. "You look washed out, honey. You feeling all right?" I told her I had definitely been better. She gently patted my arm and gave me a line I knew I would keep forever. "Nobody in this house actually asked how you're doing, did they? It wasn't a question." She had been watching this family dynamic play out longer than I had been alive, and she had already done the math. I told her thank you, and I meant it more than she could possibly know. Tomorrow, I thought, she would finally understand why. Sunday arrived warm and golden. one of those textbook early autumn days that makes a glassy lake look straight out of a postcard. By noon, cars were lined all the way down the gravel lane, and the house I owned was packed with about 25 people, family members, Brad's friends, and a handful of local lake neighbors. The tables I had set up glowed softly beneath the string lights. Somebody had actually blown up the photo from the dock, the mimosa one, the drama-free one, and propped it up on an easel right next to the food buffet like a bizarre shrine to my absence. Those custom cream and gold napkins sat neatly folded at every single plate. My mother moved through the crowd like the absolute lady of the manor, gracefully accepting compliments on the property as though she had built the entire structure with her own 2 hands. She even told one of the neighbors how the family had managed to hold on to this place through thick and thin. Through thick and thin. I stood off to the side in the exact color palette I had been assigned, holding a simple glass of water because my stomach still couldn't handle anything else, and I felt strangely, terrifyingly calm. I had a thin manila envelope tucked inside my bag. Inside, it was a clean copy of the recorded deed and a copy of the fully executed purchase agreement. Not because I planned to wave papers around like a courtroom lawyer, but because I have learned that people love to argue with a living person, but they go completely silent in front of an indisputable document. I didn't want a scene. I have never wanted a scene in my entire life. What I wanted was for the unvarnished truth to finally stand up tall in the exact same room as everyone who had spent 6 years talking right over it. Brad clinked his ring against a glass and called for everyone's attention. My mother took center stage by the easel, right beside the blown-up photo of the day they toasted my absence, raised her champagne flute, and prepared to deliver a toast. And I slowly set my glass of water down. My mother is undeniably good at a speech. I will grant her that much. She stood there, glowing in the warm afternoon light, thanking everyone for making the drive. She talked about Brad and his fiancée, about young love and new beginnings, and the crowd made all the warm, approving noises crowds always make. Then, because she simply cannot help herself, she decided to twist the knife a little deeper. "You know," she said, smoothly swirling her champagne, "some people in this life bring peace wherever they go, and some people just bring a storm." A few uneasy chuckles rippled through the guests. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. Everyone already knew who she meant. "Brad has always been my sunshine," she went on, her voice carrying across the deck. "He brings this family pure joy, not drama. And on a beautiful day like this, at our beautiful family home, I think we all know how rare and precious that is." She actually reached out and gestured toward the physical house when she said it. Our beautiful family home. Then she gracefully pivoted to the part she had clearly been rehearsing all week, the part about the future. She announced that now that Brad and his future wife were starting a family of their own, it was high time to think seriously about the lake house, about traditions, inheritance, and making sure the property stayed safely in the right hands for the next generation. She stated, loud and clear, that she believed Brad and his bride should have first claim on the house for all their summers moving forward. She was standing in my house, in front of 25 witnesses, calmly handing my real estate over to my brother like a platter of food she was passing down the Sunday dinner table. And then she lifted her champagne, flute a little higher, smiling radiantly, ready to deliver the final triumphant toast she had built the entire weekend around. "To family," she said, "and to keeping this place drama-free forever." The glasses started to rise in unison. That was the exact moment I stood up out of my chair, and across the lawn, the room began, one face at a time, to notice me. I didn't raise my voice. That is the detail everyone remembers afterward, the fact that I never once elevated my tone. I simply stood up, stayed right where I was, and said, "Before everyone drinks to that, I'd like to say something." My mother's smile tightened sharply at the edges. I could see her already bracing for a scene, predicting the dramatic outburst she had spent the whole week warning everyone about, waiting for the performance she could later use to tell the neighbors how Chloe had ruined the party. She thought she knew what was coming. She thought I was going to cry, scream, or throw an accusation that she could easily dismiss with a heavy sigh and a knowing look. I did none of those things. I kept my hands loose at my sides and my voice low and even. The exact cadence I use with a terrified patient at 3 a.m., the kind of steady authority that makes an entire room lean in without even knowing why. "Thank you all for coming out to the lake house today," I said. "It really is a beautiful place. It's meant a lot to this family for a long time." I let those words sit. And since we are all here talking about it, about who should have it and who truly belongs to it, there is one question this family never actually got around to asking in 6 whole years. So, I'm going to answer it for you. The gentle clinking of glasses had completely stopped. Somewhere down by the shoreline, a kayak paddle knocked a hollow echo against the wooden dock, and for a second, it was the only sound in the yard. My mother let out a small, brittle laugh. "Chloe, honey, is this really the time?" "I won't be long," I replied. "I'm not the dramatic one. Remember?" "6 years ago," I said, casting my gaze across the quiet yard. This house was 3 weeks away from being auctioned off on the cold courthouse steps. The county was seizing it for back taxes that nobody in this family had bothered to pay. Some of you knew that. Most of you didn't. I saw a few of the older relatives go completely still. The ones who vividly remembered that brutal winter. Dad was recovering from his heart attack. The medical bills were drowning them. And the house that every single one of you thinks of as an untouchable family heirloom was about to legally belong to a total stranger. I kept my voice as level as a spirit line. So, I paid it. Over $41,000 out of my own personal savings and a high-interest loan I am honestly still finishing paying off. Back taxes, severe penalties, redemption fees, and enough of Dad's crushing medical debt to finally stop the collection calls. I was 26 years old. My mother's face had drained of color, matching the white tablecloth. Brad's mouth was hanging wide open. And because Mom and Dad still had aggressive creditors circling who could have snatched the property right back, I continued. The family attorney had them legally sign the house over to me in front of a notary to protect it. I reached into my bag then. I didn't wave any papers around like a courtroom lawyer. I simply set them down flat on the table right beside the blown-up photograph and the gold-stamped napkins, where the afternoon sun caught the crisp edges. "This is the official deed," I said softly. "It has had one single name on it for 6 years. Mine. And every October since then, when the property tax bill arrived, it came straight to my address and I paid it out of my own pocket. Every single year. While all of you spent your carefree summers here and never once wondered who was actually keeping the lights on. The entire yard had plummeted into a dead, suffocating silence. 25 people stood frozen, holding 25 glasses that nobody was drinking from anymore. I let the deed rest there on the table and delivered the final part as plainly as a nurse delivering a difficult diagnosis. Last week, I collapsed at work. I bled internally until I passed out cold on the ER floor. The hospital called this house's favorite people, my parents. And they said they were too busy, that I was always fine, and they drove out here instead. And my brother posted a photograph from that very dock and called it a day without the drama. Brad made a small, choked sound. I didn't stop. So, this week, I made one phone call. I accepted a verified, cash buyer offer on the house. It's sold. There is a fully signed agreement. The earnest money is locked in escrow, and the formal closing happens in 30 days. The new owners are lovely. They've already promised to keep the maple tree I planted by the porch. For one full, agonizing second, absolutely nobody moved. And then my mother detonated. She slammed her champagne flute down onto the table so hard the liquid splashed everywhere, her composure snapping into something raw and shrieking. "You can't do that!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "This is our home. This is our family house. You have no right. It has my name on it, Mom," I said quietly. "It always did. After everything we did for you," she cried, tears instantly streaming down her face as she unraveled completely. "You ungrateful, spiteful girl! How could you do this to your own brother on his big day? You're ruining his engagement!" Brad wailed and burst into loud, theatrical tears right alongside her. And my father slowly stood up from his chair, his face stark white, and said absolutely nothing at all. "You're being dramatic!" My mother spat through her hot tears, instinctively reaching for the only weapon she had ever needed in her arsenal. "You're being dramatic, just like you always are." I looked straight at her. My voice didn't climb a single solitary inch, and the entire yard heard every word. "For 6 years," I said, "not one of you ever bothered to ask whose name was on the deed. You just used the house, took everything for granted, and called me cold or dramatic every single time I asked to be treated like I actually mattered. That wasn't drama, Mom. That was me paying the price." Nobody breathed. "You said I was always fine," I went on, my tone still steady, still quiet, still anchored in reality. "And you were right. I was fine. I was always fine. I just wasn't yours to use anymore." I picked the signed purchase agreement back up off the table and held it, not like a threat, but simply like a hard, undeniable fact. I am not taking anything that isn't legally mine. I did the math on every single dollar you and Dad actually contributed to this house in the last 6 years. And I am sending you a check for it, plus your original down payment from way back when. Every single cent. You will have it in your hands this week. I am not you. I don't keep what doesn't belong to me. I looked around at the frozen faces in the yard, at the photo easel, at the snapshot of the day they had chosen a sunny dock over a dying hospital bed. "You wanted a day without the drama," I said, letting my gaze drift over to my brother, who was still crying into his fiancée's shoulder. "So, I'm giving you a lifetime of quiet." For a moment, the only sound in the afternoon air was my brother's whimpering and the gentle water lapping against a dock that wasn't ours anymore. Then, slowly, the room shifted the way a room always does when a lie that everyone half suspected finally cracks wide open in the light. My great-aunt Peg sat her coffee cup down. She was 70 years old, had watched this family's toxic patterns her entire life, and she stood up right in front of everyone. In a voice like a heavy door clicking shut, she said, "She saved this house while the rest of you just vacationed in it." A few of the older cousins nodded in agreement. One of the lake neighbors quietly set his champagne flute down untouched on the table. My mother spun around frantically, looking for an ally, and found a yard full of people who had just done the arithmetic in their heads. Her performance had nowhere left to land. And my father, my quiet, peacekeeping father, who had sent a lazy get-well text from his recliner while I bled internally, reached down and picked up the deed off the table with a hand that visibly shook. He held it close and read it. Truly read it. His own signature down at the bottom from 6 years ago, my name right up top. His face crumpled. "It really is her name," he whispered, almost to no one and to everyone. For half a heartbeat, I thought he might finally stand up and defend me, but he only lowered himself heavily back into his chair, the deed clutched in his hand, and stared blankly at the dirt. He didn't defend me. He never once did. My mother tried one last, desperate attempt at the very end to change the shape of the disaster. Her voice slid all at once from blind fury back into dripping honey. The fastest, most terrifying switch I had ever witnessed. She reached a trembling hand out toward me across the table. "Chloe, sweetheart, "Let's just talk about this," she pleaded. "We can work something out. You don't have to." But it was 6 years and one empty hospital bed too late, and we both knew it. I gathered my papers into their manila folder, completely unhurried, and slid them back into my bag. Then I did one final, deliberate thing. I reached over, grabbed the nearest cream and gold party napkin, and squared it up neat. The exact way I had laid out all 25s of them the morning before. "Enjoy the party," I said. "It's the last one here." I didn't shout it, and I didn't cry. I simply turned around and walked back through the house I had saved. Past the kitchen where I had hosted a dozen Thanksgivings, out the front door I had painted with my own hands, and down the porch steps I had rebuilt after the ice storm. Nobody followed me. I got into my car, sitting in a gravel lane completely blocked in by everyone else's vehicles, and shut the door. And only then, completely alone in the quiet cabin of my car, did I finally let out the breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 agonizing years. Who's dramatic now? I thought to myself. I didn't need to ask it out loud. The party napkins had already answered for me. The sale closed 30 days later. Quiet, clean, and entirely on my terms. The Prescotts turned out to be every bit the wonderful people Gwen promised. They even mailed me a postcard that fall featuring a snapshot of the maple tree I had planted, its leaves turning brilliant red at the edges, standing tall and strong right by the porch. I mailed my parents a certified check covering every single dollar they had genuinely contributed to that house over the years, down payment included, alongside a short, final note. I told them I would always consider myself family, but I was officially resigning from being their furniture. I wrote that I would gladly attend family holidays when invited as a cherished daughter instead of assigned as unpaid manual labor. And not a single moment before. My mother left me 11 emotional voicemails over the next 2 weeks. I listened to the first 3. They swung wildly from tearful, dramatic apologies straight back into bitter blame, sometimes all within the exact same breath. After that, I deleted the rest without listening because I had finally learned the permanent difference between a genuine apology and a manipulative performance. Brad got married the following spring at a completely different venue and didn't invite me. Honestly, it felt a whole lot less like a punishment and much more like being permanently let off a heavy hook. My father never reached out, but Aunt Peg did. She called and invited me over to her cozy little house in town for Sunday dinner. Just the 2 of us and her lazy old basset hound. I went. I sat down at a dinner table I hadn't set, ate a home-cooked meal I hadn't had to prepare, and was actually asked how I was feeling with people who genuinely cared about the answer. It was the first time in longer than I could remember that I had occupied a family seat as an invited guest rather than the hired staff. Afterward, I helped her wash the dishes. Not out of crushing obligation, but simply because I wanted to, which turns out to be an entirely different experience altogether. I finally learned that being the strong, dependable one was never the real problem. The true problem was letting people mistake my quiet endurance for perpetual permission. And the day I finally spoke my truth out loud, placing my name right where it had always quietly belonged, I stopped bleeding out for people who wouldn't even cross a hospital parking lot to check if I was breathing. That is my story. One sudden collapse, one gloating photograph, and one life-changing phone call. If you have ever been the dependable, one that everybody leans on and everybody forgets to thank, let this story be your sign. Your endless kindness was never a lifelong debt you were forced to pay forever. And setting a firm, unyielding boundary is not the same thing as being dramatic. Go check whose name is really on the heavy things you've been carrying for everyone else. And if this story resonated with your soul, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.